Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 21 of the Ponsonby and Massey podcast. Now, the first thing you're going to notice today, for those of you that are watching on YouTube, is that we're not in our usual environment because we have come here to the Press Bar in Albion Street in Glasgow, probably one of the great famous journalist pubs, and this is where many grizzled hack have spent many an afternoon. I'm grizzled, Alex not. I'm a heavy drinker because I'm from Glasgow. He's from Edinburgh, although he's sitting here with a pint of Tennent's. We'd like to thank the Press Bar for allowing us to do some of our podcasts in this environment. If you're in Glasgow, this is in Albion Street. It's right in the Merchant City. It's a 35ml shop, so you get a good measure. The beer is extremely well kept, and as an Guinness aficionado, I have to tell you it's one of the top 10 pints in the city. So a big thanks to the Press Bar. Great bar staff here. Great mixed crowd. Come in for an afternoon, enjoy the music in the evening, and a big thanks to them. And Alec, welcome all the way from the east to this citadel of Scottish journalism.
And therefore of depravity and creative accountancy, a place where many an expenses claim has been fabricated over the years, and all the better for it. And you know, I mean, the Press Bar here, you know, it's very different from one of the great press pubs in Edinburgh, is the Jingle and Geordie on Flesh Market Close, which is a magnificent address for any pub. But that used to be the old Scotsman pub in the Evening News in Edinburgh, a pub with tremendous views over Princes Street and Waverley Station and over to what was then the North British Hotel and so on, or would have tremendous views if the curtains had ever been opened. A place of Stygian darkness at all times. The smell of spilt 80 shilling, clouds of cigarette smoke, Woodbines and Benson and Hedges, and embittered hacks and sub-editors.
And of course we should also say, in relation to the Jingle and Geordie, in the days when Alec Wood led the Labour group in Edinburgh District Council, all of the splits and all of the plots all started in the Jingle and Geordie. My abiding memory of it was one night trying to get out of it to find that there was a lady on all fours crawling out the pub. I stepped over her, looked back, and saw that it was a very prominent Lord Provost.
I mean, it's a sad reflection on the realities of the press trade, particularly the ink trade these days, that journalist pubs are not what they once were. In fact, they've all but disappeared, and so the Press Bar is a sort of throwback to a golden and now vanished age.
Which most of us can't remember.
And all the better for that, I suspect. We are in danger of digressing. Well, we haven't actually digressed because we haven't got to the stuff we're going to be talking about today. I mean, as always, a packed show. I thought we might talk a little bit about Conservative shenanigans on both sides of the border. We might talk a little bit about the latest developments in the American presidential election, and possibly, if we have time for it, some reflections on the SNP Labour scrap over welfare and specifically the two-child cap on eligibility for benefits. So quite a lot to get through. We have the beginnings of Tory races for the vacant or soon-to-be vacant leadership posts, both at the UK level, where Rishi Sunak is now effectively the sort of interim leader until November, when his successor is going to be selected, and the Scottish Conservatives, thanks to Douglas Ross's quixotic decision to resign the leadership in the middle of a general election campaign, are still formulating the sort of rules and timetable for their contest. Those details are expected to be announced next week, but we already have the first runner in that race. Russell Findlay has announced that he's going to stand. So we have these two Tory races, one for the leadership of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, one for the party at the UK-wide level. Shall we start south of the border?
South of the border, yeah.
Because we have more confirmed candidates there.
We do, and we'd won this morning, Robert Jenrick, former immigration minister, someone who resigned that position because the party wasn't being tough enough on immigration. He very clearly, I think of the three who have declared, will be the standard bearer of the right. But of course we cannot rule out the possibility that there might be additional candidates, Suella Braverman, Kemi Badenoch, so we simply don't know who will emerge as the leading figure of the right. I would almost certainly at this period rule out James Cleverly. I think that he's far too associated with the previous government, and I think that one of the fault lines in the election for the new Conservative leader will in a sense be putting as much distance between their candidacy and the record of the Sunak years. I think you can see even at this early stage, and of course Tom Tugendhat has also thrown his hat into the ring, even this early we are seeing the effects of Reform UK. Tom Tugendhat this morning saying that he would stand prepared to tear up the European Convention of Human Rights. Now, if we're being charitable about this, one of the things that we could say is that, well, that was the Tory position at the election because Sunak was making the point that they stand ready to tear it up. Nobody, I think, really believed that he was serious, and Tugendhat would come from traditionally, I think, more towards the One Nation Tory school. He would be the candidate of the left, Jenrick the candidate of the right,
and Cleverly somewhere in the middle.
Some in the middle and a continuity candidate. I just think that more people will enter the race, and that as the issues become defined, as it gets up and running and they do all the hustings, inevitably they will be dragged to the right. And even this early, with some of Tom Tugendhat's observations on the European Convention, that is already happening.
It is. I suppose we should explain or just remind listeners how the process is going to work. Nominations have to be in by, I think it's Tuesday of next week. The parliamentary party will then whittle the field of candidates down to 4, which is, of course, now a surprisingly large percentage of the total Conservative parliamentary party. And those 4 will deliver a presentation to the Conservative Party conference in October, and the final 2 will then be chosen by the parliamentary party again, and the membership will select one of those 2 to succeed Rishi Sunak. And so there are, if you like, 2 fields that prospective candidates have to satisfy. They have to gain sufficient support from their colleagues in the House of Commons to get first to the final 4. And then, obviously, they have to, if they get to the final 2, they have to win over the membership. And those are 2 distinct audiences, and so there is a certain tension there, I think. If you look at Tom Tugendhat, you're absolutely right. He's from, if you like, the liberal wing or the left wing or the moderate One Nation wing of the Conservative...
Less headbanger wing?
The wetter wing. But, a lot of these candidates have somebody like Tugendhat and so on. He is conscious that you can only win the Conservative Party leadership by appealing to the members and to your parliamentary colleagues. If you go around saying, well, we were wrong about absolutely everything and we need to rethink absolutely everything, then you are not going to be in a position to become leader. So you have to lie, essentially. And we have an example of how this can be done. I mean, if you look at the prospectus on which Keir Starmer was elected leader of the Labour Party, well, that was a sort of Corbynite light manifesto. And then Starmer, over the next 2 or 3 years, just quietly ditched one Corbynite policy and one Corbynite promise after another, thereby earning the enmity of the Labour left. But, who's laughing now? And so, you have to bear in mind the electorate. So the specific promises made by Tory candidates, I think, don't necessarily matter very much. It doesn't offer us a reliable guide to how they would actually behave if they were to become leader. But of course, this is also a thankless time to become leader of the Conservative Party.
It is. I mean, there is another issue which I think is quite an important one because of the way in which the select the leader or elect the leader eventually, and that is that it raises the possibility that you can have a candidate who commands perhaps a majority within the parliamentary party, but when 2 or 3 people actually go to the party in the country, the individual that can unite the party in Parliament is not what the members actually want. And I think that this is quite an important issue, because if we look at Theresa May's premiership, it was effectively done in by the fact that she couldn't get a Brexit through the House of Commons because the parliamentary party was divided. The parliamentary party eventually lost faith in Boris Johnson.
For good reason.
For good reason, and they lost faith in Liz Truss.
And for even better reasons.
And Rishi Sunak, who, got it in the basis it was his turn because they simply ran out of patience with everybody else. I think it is important in parliamentary politics that the leader of the party actually commands the respect and authority of the parliamentary party, because if you have a leader who is not well regarded by fellow MPs, you are hardwiring all sorts of difficulties for that leadership on day one. And the problem with the process is that it raises the possibility that the wider party will foist on MPs somebody that they don't have confidence in. I mean, how else could you explain Liz Truss, for example?
Well, indeed. But, this is the current fashionable position across all political parties, which is that the members of the party, who by definition are not representative of the broader electorate, must be given the final say on who becomes leader. And that's the case with the SNP, it's the case with Labour, it's the case with the Liberal Democrats, and obviously with the Conservatives. I think there are compelling grounds for scrapping that whole process and suggesting that actually leaders should be elected by their peers within the parliamentary party and by nobody else. But what's your view on that?
Well, of course, the Labour Party historically used to always elect the leader from within MPs. And in fact, when Jim Callaghan lost the election in 1979, one of the things that he did is that he resigned early to ensure that MPs, and not an electoral college of MPs, members and trade unions, would elect the leader, because he was very, very conscious that if it went to an electoral college, there was a chance that you were going to have a left-wing leader foisted on a parliamentary party which was more mainstream. And of course, in a sense, it backfired, because that decision was all about making sure that Dennis Healey was a shoo-in for leadership. It didn't happen. Michael Foot got it. The Electoral College was then born. And, you've had these situations ever since where Jeremy Corbyn, who did not command the support of the parliamentary party, in a sense, people felt sorry for him.
I'm not sure how many people really felt very sorry for Jeremy Corbyn.
Margaret Beckett felt so sorry for him that she signed his nomination papers, got him over the threshold, and then, as a consequence of that, the membership process took over, and Corbyn won not one landslide leadership election, but 2. And all of these MPs in Parliament were then saying, this is a leader that at the end of the day, he's got the mandate because of this system, and we accept the system, but we would rather have a different leader with a different set of policies. And the problem, I think, for the Tories this time is that you may well get, yet again, a leader which doesn't reflect the views in Parliament. What I haven't seen, Alec, I don't know if you have, is where the new MPs, or some new MPs and mostly old MPs, sit on the Tory ideological spectrum. Are they more to the right? Are they more One Nation Tories? And does that indicate the kind of leader that they would want?
I think that's not particularly clear at present. I think the key question that is going to dominate a lot of the debate, and there are going to be other contenders as well. Priti Patel, for instance, has been keeping quite quiet, but there are strong grounds for believing that she might be a contender. Also, Mel Stride, another former minister. The key question is, you alluded to this earlier, I think, is how do they deal with the spectre of reform and Nigel Farage? Jenrick is already out of the block saying essentially, or Danny Kruger, who's sort of going to be a lead figure in Jenrick's campaign, is saying, basically we have to merge with Reform, or at the very least we have to take back the people who went to Reform. So that clearly means, moving to the right and away from the centre ground where traditionally British elections have been won. And in the short term, you can see there is actually a certain logic to that. Even if you wouldn't find it a particularly attractive proposition yourself, you can see how this sort of unite the right call has a certain sense to it.
In tactical sense,
in the short term.
In electoral terms, it doesn't.
No, but electoral terms is not the current problem for the Conservative Party. I mean, when you have received a licking of the size and significance of this general election defeat, where you have been squeezed from all sides in tactical voting with the Lib Dems, obviously votes for Labour as well, and Labour have this stonking majority. Sometimes all you can do is just sort of accept the punishment and wait. The idea that you can revive the Conservative Party as an election-winning force in the next 12 months and so on is for the birds. That can't be done. And so all the stuff about how, it was competence that did us in, and the public didn't think that we were competent enough. There's obviously a lot of truth in that. I mean, more truth in that than the idea that people rejected the Conservatives because they had betrayed conservative ideology. I mean, that's nonsense. But you can't demonstrate competence overnight in opposition. And so you can't really have a long-term plan right now when it's only a couple of months after you've received an almighty trouncing at the polls. So, I would say that it's actually too soon to become Tory leader. If I wanted to be Conservative leader, I'm not sure I would want to lead the party right now. At the same time, logic says to people, well, what if there isn't another time? What if this is my only chance? And so you have to sort of go for the crown while it's available.
Even though it's not a short-term timetable, I still think that this will be an election which will be fought by knee-jerk. They simply don't have time to chart out a serious policy prospectus all the way to the next election. So I think it's a leadership contest which will be fought in cliches. Most of those cliches will be dominated around the issue of patriotism, immigration, small states, lower taxes, all this kind of stuff. But I have incredible confidence in the ability of Conservative Party members to choose the wrong candidate, because they've done so before and they can do so again. But of course,
but then they've also got the right candidate sometimes.
Oh, sometimes.
David Cameron, for instance. I mean, I think the membership were in advance of the.
There was an ideas-free man, if ever there was.
Well, but a man who brought the Tories back into power at a time when people were asking, can the Conservatives ever win again?
And he's now seen actually as part of the problem by those on the right, because he started off this sort of centre ground stodge. The perspective of the right is that he simply was a continuation of the New Labour years. And one of the questions which will feature in this leadership contest is, what is conservatism and who is the properly conservative candidate in the election? And that is one which could also be asked of the leadership contest in Scotland, where of course we only have one declared candidate at the moment, that is Russell Finlay. I'm always amazed that when commentators are asked on television or radio programmes, who do you think will run? Russell Finlay's name tends to come in number one. Then Murdo Fraser is actually mentioned, and then they sort of rhyme off another half dozen potential candidates. I think I would cut to the chase here and say, we know that Russell Finlay is going to run. I think on balance, Murdo Fraser will run. Some people close to him yesterday were suggesting it was 50-50. I don't see that at all. Murdo Fraser will run. The only other question is whether or not some of these other individuals who have been mooted, such as Jamie Green and Megan Gallagher, decide that they want to throw their hats into the ring as well. I think if they do, they won't get anywhere. If I am underwhelmed, and I have to say that I am underwhelmed.
You do look as though you lack whelm.
I am underwhelmed by the potential field for the Conservative Party leadership nationally. Well, boy, I am seriously underwhelmed by the potential field in Scotland. To say that it is intellectually light would be defaming people who are intellectually light.
Well, I mean, it's a couple of weeks ago, Bernard, that you suggested, and I think I quote reasonably accurately, only an idiot would want to lead the Scottish Conservative Party. And I suggested, well, in fairness, that doesn't rule many of them out. And, you know, this long list of names being mentioned, Maurice Golden is another one whose name sometimes comes up. I mean,
Stephen Kerr.
Stephen Kerr, yes. I mean, basically,
that would be good. It would be different. It would be amusing.
Well, I'm not sure you're going to get your wishes there, but yes. I mean, you know, again, you have this issue. Well, there are two issues. One is the familiar thing of, you know, should the Scottish Party be a separate organisation from the UK Party? And that is something that, you know, we have Ruth Davidson, who obviously defeated Murdo Fraser when he suggested this in 2011. You know, in today's Daily Mail, she's saying that such a split would be electoral suicide. Murdo Fraser himself seems to have sort of slightly rethought his previous proposal. He suggested that the UK party should continue to exist and stand in elections to the House of Commons, but there should be a different party to contest Holyrood elections. I'm personally not quite sure how that works, because are you then having basically one organisation with two different names, or are they actually different organisations? In which case, how is the subsidiary one, the Scottish one, going to be actually organised? I'm not sure that really answers the problem that Murdo has identified.
I think that what he's done with this is to realise that he should have beaten Ruth Davidson first time around.
And he probably would have, but for his Dignitas proposal.
Yes, he probably would have if it wasn't for that proposal. So it has failed to fly once, and therefore he's got to put some distance between himself and that now, and I suggest that he will. If we're assuming that the two front runners are Murdo Fraser and Russell Finlay, what does Fraser have? He's got a lot of experience. He has a lot of knowledge of the party because he's been around a very long time. You know, he was a young Conservative in the days when Margaret Thatcher led the party. When I was covering politics on a day-to-day basis, you know, he was there many, many years ago. I think his problem is that the Conservative Party is much changed from the party that he was a member of as a young man. He would have been a Michael Forsyth supporter back in the day rather than a Malcolm Rifkind or an Ian Lang. He was someone who was very much on the right. He was more robustly anti-devolution back in the day. But, you know, the Conservative Party is a much changed party. How many people are going to vote in this election? How many people are eligible to vote in this election? Probably they have no more than about 7,000 members. So this is not a big electorate, and a much changed electorate from the one that started out when he was a young Conservative. So he's got experience, he's got ideas, he's held a number of portfolios, including finance. Therefore, he's an experienced parliamentarian, and he's a relatively experienced media performer. Unlike Russell Finlay, where he is not an experienced parliamentarian. I should declare that, I mean, I worked with Russell for a couple of years because he spent a couple of years in the STV newsroom.
Did you spy a future leader of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party at that time?
I didn't spy a future member of the Conservative Party at the time. Russell was always, I mean, just to be clear about this, I mean, Russell always had a healthy contempt for politicians. Russell's background is in newspapers. It's covering the criminal justice brief and the crime brief in newspapers. He did that with considerable courage and skill, it has to be said. He is a very good old newspaper man on the business of news. He really is. And because most old school newspaper men don't have very high opinions of journalists, and insofar as he expressed any views, they tended to be negative. So when he when he told me that he was going off to become a communications man for the Scottish Conservatives, I have to confess that I chuckled inside. And then when he was on the list in the west of Scotland, and indeed I think topped the list in the west of Scotland, I was completely and utterly gobsmacked, and it appears the meteoric rise simply goes on.
Well, meteoric rise to a very small hillock, if you could have such a thing. Yeah, I mean, I think Findlay's conversion to the cause of conservatism was that the Tory party at the time, and both appeared and was, the most forthright defender of the Union and the most consistent and coherent anti-SNP party. And so, that was what I think drew Russell Findlay to the Conservatives, rather than a belief in, neo-Thatcherism or Hayek or one nation Tory traditions or anything like that. In the same way as somebody like Adam Tompkins was drawn to the Conservative Party for the same reason, some of the same reasons. And so Findlay is presenting himself as a sort of not quite a back to basics conservative, but a common sense conservative, and so on. So we would expect the Tories to take a very strong line on law and order, But all the prospective candidates have been saying, they've been saying sort of two things. One, we need to talk about things that aren't just the Constitution. We need to expand our playing field, if you like, beyond that relatively small part of the game, where everybody knows what the Tories stand for, but with independence now clearly off the table for the next few years, the Tories have to find some new songs to sing. And secondly, they're all saying, Megan Gallagher was saying this in an interview with the Sunday Times last weekend, that, they are convinced there are far more people who are actually Conservatives in Scotland than who are prepared to vote for Conservative candidates. Now, to some extent, this is probably true on an issue-by-issue basis, but it is the overall package that is the problem, and that has made the Tories a minority enthusiasm, and geographically, particularly in a Westminster election now we're quite a marginal presence. I mean, the Tories are now the fourth biggest party by the number of MPs. They've retreated to Aberdeenshire, the Borders, Dumfriesshire and Galloway, essentially, with very little presence in the Central Belt at all. And again, it is not quite clear to me what the Conservatives are going to offer you that is a realistic pitch for voters at the next Holyrood election that you couldn't get elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that whoever gets it has an impossible job. In fact, I think we both know that the Conservatives will not be the official opposition after the next Holyrood election in 2026.
No, that'll be the SNP.
Whoever leads them will take them to third place. And in fact, depending if there's a further push ahead for the Greens, or there is a revival in Liberal Democrat fortunes, it is not inconceivable that they could go all the way to fourth, because the percentage share of the vote at the general election the other week was the worst they've ever achieved. Murdo will, I think, brand himself as the candidate of experience. Russell is very sound on the law and order agenda, on crime issues, on issues related to how victims are dealt with by the criminal justice system. And indeed, I think it's worth marking that he has been quite effective in raising fundamental questions about the operation of the Crown Office and the tens of millions of public money that have been lost to the public purse as a result of malicious prosecutions following out from the administration of Rangers Football Club. So he's taken one or two issues, he's run with them, he's been very effective, but here's his problem. You're asking earlier on, he doesn't come from that Thatcher tradition, not the One Nation tradition. He lacks anchors in the party. He lacks anchors on a personal sense, and I think he also lacks intellectual anchors within the Conservative Party. And you're right, if he is to become leader, it will be, he will take the view that if it's common sense and I think it'll work, I will back it. Here's the issue. He's not put himself up for a lot of media grillings, one-to-ones, sit-down interviews, and I simply doubt that he's got the experience to do that. I doubt he's got the experience to carry it off. I doubt that he's quite got the stature to be a leader, And if he does lead, or Murdo leads, they're going down to defeat anyway. There is nothing they can do.
Well, I was going to say, hopefully Russell will come on this show, but maybe he won't after he hears you saying all of that.
Well, come on and prove me wrong.
Yes, exactly.
Come on and prove me wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, obviously, that Tory candidates are going to say in this election is, we need to have a pathway to lower taxation in Scotland in the future, and that is fine. I think it is also interesting that Murdo Fraser has been talking about how, look, we can't be complacent about reform in Scotland either. I mean, reform did better in Scotland than many people had anticipated, significantly outpolled the Green Party, for instance, won about 7% of the vote nationwide in Scotland. And there is also a constituency within Scotland and so on, about 15, 20, sometimes some polls suggest even a little bit more than that, who would quite happily bin Holyrood altogether and abolish the Parliament and abolish devolution. Now, those people are more likely to vote Conservative than they are to vote for any other party, but it is difficult, I think, for the Tories to appeal to that constituency while maintaining, if you like, respectability with the 75-80% of the electorate that are committed devolutionists, if not supporters of independence.
Okay, well, Russell, old chum, former colleague, we would like you on. We would like you on to explain what your manifesto is for, first of all, Conservative Party members and then the country. So do please come on. We should probably sort of move from here to over the pond, because
this is from the ridiculous to the sublime, or is it the other way around?
Since last we spoke, we thought that there might be some kickback within the Democratic Party, and that there would be a fundamental debate about whether or not Kamala Harris should be the subject of a coronation. Well, we now know that there is no such debate. We had President Biden giving his address last night from the White House, and he basically said, did he not, that he was putting the future of democracy above, because he thinks there's an existential threat to democracy in the United States, and he was putting that above any sense of personal interest. Yeah. Okay, Joe.
If that was the case, if that were truly the case, he would have announced at least 18 months ago that he was only going to be a one-term president. This notion that Biden is a hero for standing down, a selfless sacrifice, for democracy and liberty and the American way and all the rest of it, and so on, is preposterous. And so on. He was pushed out of the race because it became clear that he was likely to lose it. The Democratic Party still has an elite level machinery that is capable of doing these things. I mean, one of the things that it now seems clear to me actually is that Donald Trump has made a big mistake, and that was in agreeing to a debate with Joe Biden as early as July.
Keep the old man in the race, Donald. Keep the old man in the race.
Exactly, because that was the moment at which it became clear that, to congressional Democrats and people like Nancy Pelosi and the other members of the party establishment, that the voters were right. Because voters have perceived that Biden isn't capable of being president in 4 years' time for a long time, and for a long for an equally long period, all those doubts were dismissed particularly by the sort of establishment media, respectable media in the United States, New York Times and elsewhere, as just nonsense. Biden was the guy, but voters can see that he was failing, that he wasn't fit enough mentally or physically to do the job of campaigning for the presidency, and so therefore couldn't plausibly be president for another 4.5, 5 years. And so it was only that debate really that persuaded the Democratic machine that it had to move. And so you're absolutely right. Trump would prefer to run against Biden than against Harris. And it is quite clear that yes, Harris is now the nominee in all but name, and this will be confirmed at the convention in Chicago next month. And there has been some movement in the polls. Trump is probably still favourite, but the Democrats have a much clearer line to victory now, however difficult it may be, than they would have with Biden. And so they are in a better position. But there is a long, long way to go. I mean, all the polling suggests that a whole range of states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin, are functionally toss-up states at present.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty tight and pretty close. Trump has effectively knocked Biden out of the race as a consequence of that first debate, because it has unleashed that backlash within the Democratic Party. I've been looking at some poll numbers, and certainly I suspect that what happened was the number of senior Democrats went to Biden and said, here are the figures, we simply cannot turn this around, you have to go. I've looked at some poll figures since Harris has effectively been confirmed. They are a bit tighter, but as you say, and I agree, Trump is still probably favourite. Looking, when you drill down to some of the figures by gender and by race, as you would expect among African Americans, she enjoys a very, very commanding lead. She still enjoys a very commanding lead among Hispanics. If you were taking a slightly longer view of this, I think in terms of African Americans, it was sort of 78% for Harris. If you go back to the days of Barack Obama, it was 90%. So there is a chipping of the traditional Democratic base. And I think that the problem that she will have is that Biden is a lame duck who's going to be a lame duck all the way until January of next year. And when the election is going on, Trump is going to be able to point an accusatory finger at the White House and say he's a lame duck president, everything is in a sort of policy permafrost because he can do absolutely nothing. And the contrast will be between a White House which during the presidential election is going to be in limbo with someone who's going to present himself as strong. And that picture, the picture of the bloody deer and the clenched fist and the fight, in 50 years' time, in 100 years' time, that will be a picture that will be right up there with Iwo Jima or the grainy pictures from Dealey Plaza when JFK was shot. And it will be played again and again and again, and the contrast is a strong America with Trump or a weak America with the Democrats. And it's how the Democrats, I think, define the issue. It's how they define the issue. Trump's going to play in a populist agenda, we know that. He's going to just fight in a whole series of cliches. What do the Democrats fight on in order to ensure that enough of the electorate are engaged on issues? Because if the race is dominated by personalities, that's a pretty bad situation for the Democrats.
I think so. I mean, but at the same time, I think Harris has, there's a clear path to victory, I think, for Harris. It won't be straightforward or easily done, but Trump is a weak and divisive and very unpopular candidate in his own right. And I think there is a palpable yearning amongst a lot of voters to put the sort of Trump-Biden squabbles behind them. And so Harris can offer a kind of stability and normalcy in some ways that perhaps Biden couldn't, and that Trump certainly can't. The sweet spot for her and so on, and this is one of the difficulties for her, is that because she is African American and from California and a woman, she is easily caricatured as being left-coded, if you like. And it's true in 2020, in her brief run for the presidency, she ran from to the left of Biden. Well, she now, I think, has to position herself to Biden's right, because that's where the electorate is, and obviously that means also being significantly to Trump's left. But on questions of abortion, she has a strong story to tell, but she has to, if you like, overcome the implicit assumptions about her from a lot of middle American voters, which is that because she's African American, because she's from California, she's a liberal. And so she needs to stress, I think, her role as a prosecutor. She needs to talk about how policing is a good thing, as she did when she was, in San Francisco and Oakland and so on, saying that, actually, the people who really need cops are people in, poor neighborhoods and so on that are ravaged by crime, and that prison is a necessary thing. She needs to be tough on some of these issues, I think, to differentiate herself from the caricature that might otherwise be stuck to her. And so that, there are a number of ways that she can do that. She probably needs to pick a vice presidential nominee who, A, is clearly capable of being president, should something happen to her, and B, is ideally the governor, a white male governor of a Midwestern state. So, that's, there are a number of possibilities there. Although we shouldn't assume that picking a vice president really does much to move the needle one way or the other. I mean, one of the only examples in recent years that I think has done so was when John McCain picked Sarah Palin. And that was a negative thing because it undermined, and for a lot of voters, I think, McCain's moral seriousness. And so, it weakened brand McCain, if you like, even as it enthused a part of the Republican Party base that had never been particularly attracted to McCain or always had doubts about aspects of McCain. But in general terms, the vice presidential nominee pick doesn't really make much in the way of an electoral difference. So, Harris has to do these things. She has to have the political nous, I think, to realise she needs to reposition herself, and that her record as a prosecutor isn't just about how saying, I'm a prosecutor, Donald Trump's a felon, I know how to deal with people like that, and so on. That's good. That's a good laugh line, a good applause line, but it has to be backed up by some stuff on policy as well, I think, and to show that she's her own person, that she's not just riding on Biden's coattails or on the coattails of the Democratic establishment that has put her now into the position of being the party nominee.
Well, in America, they're looking for a new president or about to elect a new president. Back across the pond, it's still early days in the lifetime of the Labour government, but we've had the first rebellion, not a major rebellion, more of a squeak than a rebellion, really. But we get, again, a glimpse into the personality and the management culture of Keir Starmer as Prime Minister on that vote the other night in ending the two-child benefit cap. 7 Labour MPs, you probably could have named all 7 of them actually, rebelled, and he's given them a real old kicking, completely and utterly ruthless in the way in which he's dealing with them, and I suspect that he would lose no sleep if these 7 MPs, which they won't, if they defected to form some sort of independent group. But we can see this early in his leadership that he's going to be ruthless on the issue of internal party management, and I suppose the reason for that is that you can look back at periods in Tony Blair's premiership where, of course, Blair had that majority of 175, and then he had a second landslide victory, and then he had a third victory, where I think it was about 66 was the majority. But even when Labour had big majorities, there were 1 or 2 issues from time to time which came up where there were significant rebellion, of which tuition fees was one. And in fact, Blair's on record as saying that had he lost a vote on tuition fees, he would have resigned as Prime Minister. And I think that the message is being sent out by Starmer is that we have to be disciplined, and we're not going down the road of being a debating club, and that members of Parliament are going to have to trust our judgment on this. Now, you would have thought that the rebellion, given the issue, you would have thought the rebellion might have been higher. The reason that I don't think that the rebellion was particularly high is that I will give a prediction that before the end of this Parliament, this policy is going to go. Both Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer absolutely understand that it is almost against the very things that Labour should traditionally stand for to have this policy, which is absolutely hated in the country. What they couldn't do was to come in and in a matter of weeks say that it was going to go without knowing where they were going to get the money to pay for it. So I think that the Parliamentary Party were on side because they know that this is going to go. It's just a case of when.
Yes, although I would caution, take issue with one part of what you're saying there, Bernard, which is the suggestion that the benefit cap is hated across the country. I think if you look at polling on that, you will find that quite a lot of people support it. Now,
hated by Labour Party members.
Undoubtedly. But yes, it is quite clear that I think, you said by the end of this Parliament, I would suggest that by the end of this year, the process of the benefit cap being lifted will be underway.
I mean, perhaps in her first statement, she will signal a timetable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Reeves and Starmer have set up a interdepartmental task force to look at child poverty in particular in the round. Now, you do not do that if you are not expecting it to come back with a recommendation that you are going to accept with regard to the benefit cap. So this Labour rebellion, the 7 of them, the miniature 7 rather than the magnificent 7, so people like John McDonnell, Rebecca Long Bailey and so on, they voted with an SNP amendment that called on Labour to lift the cap. Now, Labour's policy is that we will get round to it when we can make the sums add up and find the money for it. It seems to me, that it is quite clear that is going to happen. And so the punishment, I think, meted out by Starmer, which was a 6-month suspension of the Labour whip, was, as you're right, quite right, and so on, to set an example, lay down a marker, but also to say, look, we all know we are going to do this at some point and soon as possible, actually. So it is self-indulgent and posturing to be voting with the SNP on this issue. It's a sort of egotism on part of the 7, and we will not have any of that.
And I bet you that the same 7 individuals will be serial rebels during the lifetime of this Parliament.
And that's fine from Starmer's point of view, because if you've got the rump Corbynites sort of saying that, consistently saying that, we feel betrayed by Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, we don't like this version of the Labour Party, they are reinforcing the key thing that Starmer was elected on, which is that this is not and no longer is Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. We have changed. So they are very useful to Starmer. The other question, though, that arises, I think, on this issue, Bernard, is that the SNP have been using this as a cudgel with which to beat Labour for many years now. I mean, Alison Thewlis, the former MP from Glasgow Central, was a key part in the SNP's assault on Labour on a range of welfare and benefit issues. So let me suggest this to you, John. What is the SNP going to say when Labour do get round to lifting the benefit cap? How do they continue to pretend that there is no difference between a Labour government and a Conservative government? How do they rebut the suggestion that will come from Labour, which is that the SNP carp from the sidelines, but Labour is in government and in government to deliver change? There is, I think, a difficulty, or at least a potential problem for the SNP here, which is that their own rhetoric on many of these issues is going to come back and bite them.
I think it's more than a potential problem. If you're right, I suspect you are, and that Rachel Reeves moves on this before 2026. Before 2026, you have the issue of this is abolished effectively in England, and Labour in Scotland will say, we will abolish it too when we're in government. And the SNP, who've been leading the charge on it, then have to find the money to mitigate it before 2026.
Well, I think it would actually be lifted on a UK-wide basis because it's eligibility for universal credit. Yeah. So it would apply in Scotland too. But Scottish Labour absolutely would be able to say, look, we are delivering change of a sort that the SNP simply cannot. And it's true, the SNP could actually have alleviated some of this because the post-Smith Commission devolution settlement allows the Scottish Parliament to create new benefits if it wants to. So it has in terms of the Scottish child payment, which mitigates some aspects of the benefit cap but doesn't compensate for it fully. That is a choice the SNP and the Scottish Government have made, and reasonably so in certain respects, because the money for that would have to come from elsewhere, and the child payment is going to cost at least £400 million this year alone, and will continue to rise throughout the rest of this Parliament. So, there is a real squeeze there. But I think, the difficulty for the SNP in trying to outflank Labour from the left, I think is, I don't see that as a sustainable position for the SNP to take, not least since, at Holyrood anyway, the people in charge of the SNP, John Swinney and Kate Forbes, neither of them are associated with the left, neither of them make convincing tribunes of the left, for the very good reason that neither of them are of the left.
Right, we've had a really good go at those issues. I think that's us coming up for the 45-minute mark. This has been the first podcast that we have taken out of our normal environment. Once again, this is the Press Bar in Glasgow's Albion Street on the fringes of the merchant city. Do get yourself down. Great music here, great staff, great beer. 35 ml for you folks that like a good G&T.
And one of those pubs, a proper pub, it shows horse racing, on the telly. It's not one of these pubs with yoga circles and knitting clubs.
But we're going to be here regularly, and a big thanks to the staff here at the Press Bar. We're going to also be taking your questions. Remember to send your questions to us. That's ponsonbymassey@gmail.com. And if you're on X, what was formerly Twitter, it's at ponsonbymassey. Always delighted to hear what you have to say. And in case you're watching Russell Finlay, the invitation is to come on to let us know what ground you're going to be navigating during the course of the Scottish Conservative leadership election, and more broadly where you think the party in Scotland is going to go. And, Murdo, we've known one another a long time. You come on too and let us know what you're going to be doing. But for the moment, from the Press Bar in Albion Street in Glasgow, it's a goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. And it's your round, Bernard.